Okay, we're at our final patient packaging device. That is the Stokes litter basket, or a lot of times what we'll just call a Stokes. The Stokes basket looks a little bit maybe out of place in a confined space program because of course it is the largest and bulkiest of the patient packaging options that we have. Keep in mind, however, that even though you may not use the basket to get someone out of the confined space, oftentimes the entrance to a confined space is not at grade level. It may be on top of a tank, at a mezzanine level, something along that line, and the patient still needs to get from that point down to the ground. So while you can certainly continue to lower them in the spec pack or the LSP as it were, that's fine, you could do that, but their injuries may be better served and they may be better protected by putting them in the basket and then lowering them in a horizontal configuration as opposed to more vertical like we would in those other items. So for that portion you may very well use the litter basket. Some of the plants, I think most recently, we had an incident in Kansas City where a worker was injured and he was packaged in a basket and then lowered down from, I believe, from the roof area. So it is a legitimate tool for the ERT to be using, and we do want to make sure that we're comfortable and familiar with how the packaging works with this. So we'll spend a couple of minutes talking about that. As a side note too, we won't get into the actual rigging of this with the litter bridle and so forth. We'll talk about that in a different class when we start talking about the transfer portion of this. So we've got our patient in here. They may or may not still be packaged in your spec pack in the LSP. If they had a head or neck back injury type thing, we would certainly just leave them right in that device to provide that C-spine support and then put them in the basket to actually make the move. The key to this operation is to keep the patient in the basket. That is kind of the all-encompassing important part of this thing. We want to secure them in here in such a way that they're not going to come out. In the past we have done a couple of different varieties or versions of lashing with webbing to keep them in the basket. We've also have some of the plants have baskets that have seatbelt type straps incorporated right into the litter, and each of those techniques has its own ups and downs. The technique that we're going to show you today is what we tend to be moving towards now in most of the plants. I think everybody has transitioned into making use of the ratchet strap type assemblies. So that's what we're going to focus on here. But again, if you're still familiar with or comfortable using the webbing, 1-inch webbing, tubular webbing works best for that, that's fine. You can still continue to do that. But we'll make our connections here today with the webbing. I've already pre-rigged one side of this, just in the interest of time. The other side of it I'll rig up to kind of show how that goes. Now there are a variety of different baskets in the Ford system, in the ERT equipment caches. So you may find you may have to make some slight adjustments depending on the make or model of the particular litter that you're using. But generically speaking, what you're going to do is there's a stitched loop on one end of this webbing. Okay, this is a 10 or 11 foot length of webbing. There's a loop sewn in one end of it. And that is simply intended just to be girth hitched or choked onto the frame of the litter up here at the head end. Again, the particular style of litter that you have will determine where exactly you're going to put this. And we'll also see that the size of your patient will also kind of play into this as well. Because if you have someone who's relatively short or overly tall, you may need to move this attachment point from here maybe to up to this place up here. And I'll show you what we're talking about. So for example, if I attach this up here at the head end and then I bring this down, notice that the webbing comes right across our patient's neck. Even if I were to slide him up in the litter a little bit, I'm coming pretty close to his airway, potential airway issues. So I want to make sure that however I rig this, I want to make sure that when this webbing comes across, it doesn't create a potential airway problem. Kind of our rule of thumb is nothing tied horizontally across your patient's body above their nipple line. That way we'll avoid that airway issue. Our mannequin here for our demonstration is relatively short, so I move that down here to this attachment point. All we're going to be doing then is simply starting there. We're going to move across to the opposite side, and the next vertical post that I come across, so these are the vertical posts that we see on the litter. Here's one here, there's the next one here, there's two close by each other down here. Those are the attachment points. We don't make attachments around the frame or the rim of the litter because this would be the rub point or the scrape point against the building or the cliff or the mezzanine or whatever it might be, and that would potentially damage our webbing. So we make our connections on the vertical portions where it's connected, and I'm just going to diagonally move across my patient and pass the webbing around that next vertical post. All right, and I'll do one on this side so you can kind of see what's going on. So I just bring this around here. And then right back over to the other side. I want to try to keep the webbing flat on my patient, and I want to avoid strapping over any of their joints, particularly their knees. Okay? One other thing that's good to notice or to be aware of, when you're doing this, this guy kind of fills the litter up in this sense here, but if you have a smaller person, you may want to fill in some of the void spaces up around their chest. Absolutely, you're going to want to do something down here at the foot end. So before you get too far with any of this, if you've got gaps down here, you're going to want to get a blanket or two and fill that in to try to take some of the sloshiness, if you will, away from the patient. So maybe fill in the space around their legs. You may want to put something between their legs to help to fill that void up. So again, they don't bounce around in the litter, and try to make them comfortable. So be doing that. So again, as we're doing our lashing, keep the webbing flat so that it's most comfortable for your patient. You'll want to keep their arms lashed in place as well so that they can't reach out and get into a pinch point or something along those lines. And we'll just finish this up kind of real quick. This goes very quickly. Notice we're just going around the posts. I'm not making that round turn like we used to do with webbing. I'm just going around it one time. And then at the foot end is where we install the ratchet portion. Again, it attaches in the same way. It just girth hitches onto that vertical post and cinch that up. So when we want to lash or we want to ratchet this in place, it's a relatively simple matter to slide the webbing through the strap, through the slot in the ratchet, pull the slack out, okay? And again, make sure that you've got most of the slack taken out by hand. So I'm pulling back against the ratchet assembly, and then by the time I make 3 or 4 strokes of this thing, I should have this thing pretty well snugged up. Okay? I can do the same thing on the opposite side. Again, I'm pulling back against the ratchet assembly, and by the time I make 3 or 4 strokes of this, I've got it pretty well secured up. You may want to consider offsetting the 2 ratchets depending on the style of your basket. So one may be anchored up here, the other may be anchored up down here. That would avoid these 2 crashing into each other or running on top of each other. Again, just depends on your basket, and will also depend a little bit on your patient. Again, watch out for the joints. Make sure you get things padded in here nice and keep it comfortable for your patient. And this goes pretty quick, much faster than we saw happen with some of the other webbing configurations. But it's very secure because we're able to keep it quite snug. It goes together pretty fast. You're looking to get one good X on your patient, on their torso, on their upper torso. I want to capture their hips in here with at least one of the crosses, and then I can capture their leg with an additional cross. So I've got them pretty well held in there. Okay. As I mentioned before, if your basket does have buckles or straps already built right into it, by all means, go ahead and hook them up. That's fine. It's just going to provide a little bit extra security. But if it doesn't have them, I think this will do the job for you. And again, pretty easy to do, pretty quick.